Tonight we drift back in time, not into the grand drawing rooms of Victorian high society, but into the forgotten corners where quiet footsteps echoed and lives were lived in the shadows. This is not a tale of scandal, nor of judgment, but a soft remembering of the women whose stories were whispered, often erased, yet very much part of the fabric of Victorian England. As you listen, let the world around you grow still. Dim your lights, settle beneath your blanket, and allow your breath to slow in and out, steady as a tide. The crackle of an imaginary fireplace, the hush of a street lamp's glow, the distant clatter of horse hooves, all will become the backdrop of our journey. And if this calm story helps you rest, perhaps tap like or subscribe, but only if it feels right. For now, there is nothing more to do but listen, to wander with me into the quiet alleys of history, and let your thoughts soften like fog over cobblestones. Oh, and if you'd like, share in the comments where you are listening from, and what time it is there. I love imagining these stories weaving their way across the world, reaching each of you in your own quiet hour. The gas lamps flicker faintly, their light swallowed by London's mist. Imagine yourself walking through a narrow street in the East End, perhaps Whitechapel or Spitalfields, where the air smells of smoke, damp wood, and the faint tang of coal dust. Horses clatter in the distance, their breath steaming in the cold night. Here, life was lived after dark. Prostitutes, whom polite society called fallen women, though the phrase was heavy with judgment, stood in doorways, shawls pulled tightly against the chill. Their shoes were thin, heels worn down by endless pacing, yet they lingered on corners because corners were their livelihood. The streets themselves carried a strange rhythm. Butchers closed their shops, yet gin palaces blazed with noisy laughter. Children darted through the fog, carrying bread or scraps, while policemen walked slowly, lanterns swinging like pendulums of order. And among it all the women worked, often overlooked, sometimes feared but always present. Imagine the sounds, a soft laugh drifting from one doorway, the creak of boots on cobbles, the low hum of conversation mixing with the distant tune of a street organ. For many, it was not glamour but survival. Work was scarce, wages meagre, and the street offered a bitter sort of income when other doors were closed. And yet, even here, life had warmth. Friendships formed between women on neighbouring corners. They shared shawls, swapped stories, warned each other of rough customers. There were small kindnesses, like splitting a loaf of bread, or saving a space by the lamp where the light felt safer. The street was dangerous, yes, but it was also alive, a place where the forgotten carried on, where they navigated fog, hunger, and watchful eyes, weaving themselves into the fabric of Victorian nights. And as we leave this narrow street behind, let us step next into another corner of their world, the taverns and gin shops where warmth, noise, and a cheap drink offered a moment's escape from the cold. The narrow street fades into mist behind us, and now we push open a heavy wooden door, stepping into a place both noisy and warm, a Victorian gin shop. The air is thick with the sharp scent of spirits, mingled with pipe smoke and damp wool. Glasses clink, voices rise, and laughter breaks against the low hum of the city outside. For prostitutes in Victorian England, taverns and gin shops were more than drinking houses. They were refuges from the cold, gathering places to find customers, and sometimes the only rooms where warmth could be had without paying for a bed. A penny might buy a measure of gin, or if not, the barkeep might allow a woman to linger near the fire so long as she caused no trouble. Picture it. The long bar polished smooth by elbows, pewter mugs stacked high, candles guttering in smoky air. In the corner, two women whisper, their shawls pulled close, sharing news about a policeman's patrol. Nearby, a sailor slumps, his wages jingling faintly in his pocket, an easy target for those who lived by their wits. Not far away, another establishment offers a different flavour, the coffee house. Less noisy, less dangerous, but not entirely respectable. Here, clerks and apprentices sipped thick black coffee, scanning newspapers by candlelight. Prostitutes sometimes entered quietly, blending into the crowd, hoping for a gentleman willing to pay for company. The clatter of spoons and the rustle of newsprint mingled with the nervous glance of women trying to look as though they belonged. And always the air carried its own music. The scrape of chairs, the muttered bargaining, the sudden burst of song when someone too far into his gin forgot the hour. It was a theatre of survival, where women moved carefully, sometimes bold, sometimes cautious, always aware of who watched. Yet even in these dim corners humour flickered, a joke shared, a sly grin, a teasing remark that turned heavy air into brief laughter. Life was hard, but laughter softened its edges. Imagine sitting there now, the fire glowing low, the walls dark with soot, the wooden floor sticky with spilled drink. Around you voices fade and swell like a tide. The women here are not merely shadows in history, they are living, breathing presences, finding warmth where they can, carving space for themselves in the margins of society. And as the candles burn lower, we step back out into the night, the chill biting once again. Our path now leads not to taverns, but to the lodging houses where these women slept, cramped, crowded, and filled with stories of their own. The tavern door closes behind us with a thud, its warmth left flickering in the smoky air, and we step once more into the narrow lanes of London. The fog curls thick around the gas lamps, and the sound of boots against cobblestones echoes in the distance. For many prostitutes in Victorian England, the night's earnings, however meagre, determined not only food, but also whether there would be a roof above their head until morning. Lodging houses dotted the poorer quarters of the city. These were not genteel inns or comfortable hostels, but crowded shelters where a penny or two bought the right to share a room, sometimes even just a corner of one. The smell inside was heavy, coal smoke mixed with damp blankets, unwashed bodies, and the faint tang of disinfectant sprinkled by landlords trying to mask it all. Imagine climbing the narrow staircase of such a house in 1872. Each step creaks underfoot, sticky with mud from boots that never see polish. The walls are stained from candle smoke, patched with scraps of paper to cover cracks. You reach the landing and open a door, only to find 10, perhaps 12 people inside. Some stretched across straw mattresses, others huddled under shawls in corners. Privacy was a luxury unknown here. For prostitutes, these lodging houses were lifelines. Without them, the cold streets offered only doorways or alleys. With them, there was at least shelter, thin though it might be. Beds were often shared. Two women might curl back to back under a single blanket, strangers at first, though necessity made quick companions of them. Sometimes, a woman and her child squeezed into half a mattress, whispering lullabies over the noise of drunken laughter in the hall. Picture the sounds of such a room. A baby crying softly in the corner. Someone coughing, a deep rattling cough that never seems to leave. A pair of women whispering about a police raid, their voices urgent and low. The rustle of straw as someone turns uneasily in sleep. And beneath it all the faint hum of the city itself, leaking through broken window panes. Even within this hardship, moments of tenderness appeared. Women often pooled their earnings to afford a better bed for the night. One with a good evening might quietly slip a coin to a friend who had none, ensuring she too would rest indoors. Bread was shared, tea passed from cup to cup, and stories told to ease the loneliness. These shared beds were not only about survival, they were about connection, about finding comfort in the presence of others when the world outside felt hostile. Yet the dangers were real. Illness spread quickly in such close quarters. Typhus, smallpox, and tuberculosis lingered in the damp air, slipping from bed to bed unseen. Reformers visiting lodging houses often described them as dens of pestilence. But to those who slept there, they were simply home for a night. Dangerous, yes, but still preferable to a doorstep in the freezing fog. Imagine the dim glow of a single candle at the room's centre. Shadows stretch across the cracked walls, flickering with each breath of air through the broken sash window. Around the flame, women curl close together, some already asleep, others staring silently at the ceiling, lost in thought. One hums a tune so softly it is barely heard, a lullaby not just for herself but for the strangers beside her. In this fragile, fleeting shelter, exhaustion finally wins and sleep comes like a mercy. And as dawn creeps pale and grey through the windows, the lodging house stirs again. Women rise, shaking out shawls, buttoning thin boots, preparing to face another day of survival. The room empties, but the stories linger, stories of the forgotten, pressed into the straw, absorbed by the walls. So let us step gently back into the morning fog, leaving behind the crowded room and its whispered lullabies. Ahead lies another part of their world, how they dressed, how they painted their faces, and how clothing itself became both armour and disguise in the streets of Victorian England. The crowded lodging house fades behind us, its straw bed still warm with the echoes of restless dreams, and we step once more into the narrow arteries of the Victorian city. Morning light is weak here, filtering through the fog like a thin sheet of paper held before a candle. The streets wake slowly, filled with a medley of scents that shaped daily life, some comforting, some harsh, and some masking more than they revealed. For the women who walked these streets, smell was a constant companion. Coal smoke was everywhere, rising from chimneys and settling into shawls, hair, and skirts. The perfume of soot clung so tightly that it could not be scrubbed away, even with the harshest soap. It filled the lungs, left throats raw, and hung in the heavy curtains of gin shops and taverns. To step into the streets of Whitechapel or Lambeth was to inhale coal with every breath. But alongside the smoke came other scents. The pungent tang of horse manure, the sourness of beer spilled outside taverns, the brine of fish stalls, the sweetness of roasted chestnuts sold from carts. Imagine turning a corner and catching them all at once. Smoke, salt, damp wood, and something faintly rotten drifting from the drains. For the women who worked here, this mixture was the backdrop of life, the perfume of survival. And then, layered delicately atop it all, the faint trace of cheap perfume. Prostitutes often dabbed themselves with floral waters or powders, hoping to mask the harsher scents of the street. These perfumes were rarely luxurious. Lavender water from a market stall, rose oil cut with alcohol, or powder scented faintly with violets. Applied generously, they clung to shawls and skin, leaving a trail meant to suggest refinement, even if only for a moment. Picture a woman standing beneath a gas lamp in 1879. Her dress is worn but carefully mended, her shawl pulled tightly about her. She takes a small vial from her pocket and dabs a few drops of scent at her neck. The air around her is already thick with coal smoke, but in that small gesture she reclaims a piece of dignity, layering sweetness over soot. The perfume may fade quickly, but for a little while it allows her to feel not just a worker in the street, but a woman worthy of grace. Soap, too, played its part in this dance of survival. In lodging houses or public baths, women scrubbed with rough lye soap, its smell sharp and biting. It left skin dry, hands cracked, but it was the only defense against dirt and suspicion. Reformers often scolded prostitutes for uncleanliness, not realizing how hard they fought to stay clean with so little. The smell of soap, harsh though it was, became a mark of respectability, something to cling to when respect was often denied. And yet, the scent of survival was not always enough to protect them from judgment. Policemen and passers-by claimed they could smell out the women of the streets, as if their lives carried a fragrance of sin. It was a cruel superstition, born not of truth but of prejudice, yet it lingered in every whispered remark. Still, amid the harshness, there were softer notes. Imagine a winter night when roasted chestnuts filled the air, their warmth cutting through the cold. Or a summer evening when flowers from Covent Garden were carried through the streets, their fragrance briefly outshining smoke. For the women who work these streets, those fleeting scents were small mercies, reminders that life could still carry sweetness, even in forgotten corners. The city was a symphony of smells, some heavy, some gentle, some masking sorrow with sweetness. And in that symphony, prostitutes moved like unseen notes, perfumed, scrubbed, judged, and forgotten. So let us carry that faint scent of lavender water with us as we step onward, into another corner of their world, the clothes they wore, stitched and borrowed, armour against the night as much as attire for survival. The smoky air of the Victorian streets lingers behind us, heavy with coal and lavender water. And now we turn our gaze to the women themselves, not only who they were, but what they wore. For clothing in the Victorian age was more than fabric. It was survival, disguise, protection, and at times a cruel marker of poverty. Picture a narrow second-hand shop in 1876. Dresses hang in crooked rows, their hems frayed, their colours faded. The shop smells of damp cloth and mothballs, of lavender sachets trying and failing to mask the must. Here, many women bought their wardrobes, garments already worn by wealthier ladies, now sold at a fraction of their former price. A gown once worn to a Mayfair ball might, years later, appear on the shoulders of a woman in Whitechapel, altered clumsily, patched with mismatched fabric. For prostitutes, clothing was both necessity and advertisement. The streets were dark, the fog was thick, and yet they needed to be noticed. Bright shawls, colourful ribbons, even a sprig of artificial flowers in the hair became small beacons, drawing attention in the grey haze of the city. A red scarf or a violet ribbon might carry more meaning than an entire dress, signalling both availability and a touch of individuality. Yet the clothing was rarely whole. Dresses were bought second-hand, then let out or taken in to fit. Stains were covered with lace, tears patched with darker cloth. Corsets, if owned at all, were often broken, their stays bent from years of wear. Shoes wore thin quickly, the soles flapping against cobbles, damp soaking through with each step. To walk the streets at night with cold feet was more than discomfort. It was a constant reminder of how thin the barrier between survival and sickness could be. Imagine a woman preparing for the evening. She sits by the dim light of a single candle, pulling on stockings already mended twice at the knee. She fastens her bodice carefully, hiding the missing button with a brooch borrowed from a friend. She smooths her skirts, though the fabric is shiny with age, and wraps a shawl tightly about her shoulders. In the small cracked mirror she studies her reflection. Not grand, not elegant, but presentable enough to step into the night. Some women borrowed clothing from each other, a practice born of trust and desperation. "I'll wear the red tonight, you take the green," one might say, swapping shawls to keep up the appearance of variety. Others pawned garments during lean weeks, only to reclaim them later with a night's earnings. Pawn shops were filled with women's clothes, waiting like silent witnesses to the ebb and flow of survival. Perfume and powder added the finishing touches, a dab of rouge on the cheeks, a little kohl smudged about the eyes, and suddenly the worn dress seemed less shabby, the woman beneath less weary. These small gestures were not vanity but resilience, the refusal to be erased by hardship. Even when society labelled them as fallen, they fought to appear, in their own way, upright. And there was strategy in clothing too. Some women dressed plainly, blending with maids and shop girls, hoping to avoid the eye of police or moral reformers. Others leaned into flamboyance, drawing customers with colour and sparkle. Each shawl, each ribbon, each choice was a calculation. How to survive the night, how to draw attention without inviting danger. Now picture the streets themselves. Lamplight flickering, fog curling low, and women standing in clusters. Their dresses are not ball gowns, but patched cotton and wool, yet each carries herself with dignity, adjusting shawls against the cold, lifting skirts slightly to keep them from the mud. In the theatre of Victorian streets, these clothes were costumes, worn with both necessity and pride. And yet, behind every patched hem and borrowed shawl, there was a story. A woman who once worked as a seamstress, now mending her own dresses late into the night. A girl who once wore clean white aprons in service, now piecing together ribbons to brighten a worn gown. A mother who stitched her child's dress from scraps, while her own bodice grew thinner each year. These were not just clothes, they were shields, they were survival, they were silent witnesses to lives often ignored. So let us leave that candlelit room, the woman adjusting her shawl one last time before stepping into the fog. Ahead lies another ritual of survival, the art of painted faces, powders and rouge, where women use cosmetics not only to enhance beauty but to carve out identity in a world eager to erase them. The shawls are wrapped, the patched dresses smoothed, and now we pause before the small cracked mirror once again, For in the world of Victorian prostitutes, appearance was not only fabric, it was also the face, painted, powdered, and touched with shadows of artifice. Cosmetics were tools of survival, and though condemned by society, they were quietly, persistently used. Imagine a narrow lodging room in 1880. A woman sits on a stool, a small wooden box open before her. Inside are humble treasures, a tin of powder, a stub of rouge, a tiny brush with bristles worn thin, and a fragment of coal wrapped in paper. She leans close to the mirror, the candlelight flickering across her reflection, and begins the slow ritual of transformation. Powder came first. White powders were prized, though many were made of dangerous ingredients: chalk, lead, even arsenic in the cheapest varieties. Reformers scolded women for using them, warning that the skin beneath would sicken and rot. But the women continued nonetheless, dusting their cheeks, their foreheads, the bridge of their noses. To them, powder was not poison but promise, the promise of appearing fresher, more refined, less weary from nights spent pacing streets. Rouge followed, a dab of red on the cheeks, rubbed carefully with fingertips until it blended with the pale powder. Too much and it looked garish. Too little, and it failed to disguise fatigue. The balance was delicate, a quiet art practiced in dim light. Rouge could be bought cheaply, often from apothecaries who mixed it behind the counter, but sometimes women made their own from beet juice or crushed petals, whispering recipes to one another in hushed tones. Coal darkened the eyes, a quick smudge along the lashes, a faint shadow beneath, enough to make the gaze seem deeper, more striking. Some used burnt almonds, others a black paste carried in tiny pots. In a city where eyes met across foggy streets, that glance could be as important as a bright ribbon or a colourful shawl. And sometimes there were little tricks of illusion: a lick of vinegar across the lips to redden them, a touch of soot to fill in thinning eyebrows, even soap mixed with water and flour to stiffen hair into fashionable shapes. Necessity bred creativity, and women shared these secrets with one another as if they were spells. Society condemned such artifice harshly. Respectable women were expected to wear their faces bare, their paleness a mark of purity, their natural blush a sign of innocence. To paint the face was seen as deception, a mark of fallen women. Satirical prints mocked prostitutes with exaggerated rouge and darkened eyes, turning survival into caricature. And yet, in quiet rooms, the painting continued. For these women, cosmetics were not simply vanity. They were armor. Powder covered the marks of exhaustion. Rouge masked hunger. Coal turned the gaze into something stronger. In a world that constantly judged, makeup offered the smallest control, a way of shaping how one was seen, if only for a few hours each night. Picture again the woman before her mirror. She leans back, studies herself in the flickering light. Her dress may be patched, her shoes worn, but her face glows pale and bright, her cheeks warm with rouge, her eyes shadowed with coal. She breathes a little easier, draws her shawl around her shoulders and stands. The painted face is not deceit, it is survival, identity, defiance. Outside, the gas lamps burn, the fog thickens, and footsteps echo on the cobbles. She steps into the night, her face lit faintly by the lamps, carrying with her not only powder and rouge, but the fragile dignity they provide. And as we leave her walking into the shadows, let us follow her footsteps toward the next chapter of her world. The noisy, smoky, vibrant spaces of music halls and taverns, where life unfolded in laughter, clatter, and song. The painted face glows faintly in the gaslight, rouge and coal catching the shimmer of a flame, and now we follow her footsteps into the beating heart of Victorian nightlife, the taverns and music halls. These were places where the city's pulse grew loudest, where laughter spilled into the streets, and where the forgotten found both danger and fleeting delight. Imagine the creak of a tavern door swinging open in 1875. The air rushes out, warm and thick with the scent of beer, gin, tobacco, and damp wool. Inside, the room is crowded, wooden tables scarred with knife marks, pewter mugs clanking against each other. Voices rise layered over the scratch of a fiddle or the clumsy hammering of a piano in the corner. It is noisy, rowdy, but alive. For prostitutes, taverns were more than drinking houses. They were workplaces, gathering spots, stages where survival played itself out night after night. Some stood near the door, scanning the crowd, waiting for a nod or a coin offered with a wink. Others sat at tables, pretending at leisure, sipping watered gin while keeping their eyes on potential patrons. Every move was measured, every glance a gamble between kindness and cruelty. Music halls, larger and brighter, offered a different atmosphere. Imagine entering one, the glitter of mirrors, the chandeliers burning with gaslight, the stage alive with singers and comedians. The air hums with excitement as the audience claps in rhythm. Here, prostitutes often mingled with clerks, sailors, even gentlemen who preferred shadows to salons. It was a space where classes blurred, where laughter softened the strict lines of Victorian order. Picture a woman seated in a corner of the music hall. Her shawl is draped artfully, her cheeks still touched with rouge, her eyes ringed in kohl. She leans forward as a comic sings a bawdy song, the audience roaring with laughter. Around her, men lean closer, some shy, some bold, each a possible chance for the night's rent. She smiles faintly, playing her part in this endless theatre. The sounds of these places form the soundtrack of their lives. Boots thudding on wooden floors, coins clinking as they slid across the bar, the fizz of soda water poured into gin, the sudden hush before a song, the eruption of laughter after a joke. To us, these sounds are echoes of history. To them, they were the rhythm of survival. And yet, beneath the noise, there was tenderness. Women sat together, shoulders touching, whispering warnings or encouragement. They teased one another, shared drinks, laughed at the same jokes. In a world that often cast them aside, they carved out community in the smoky haze of taverns and halls. Not every night was joyous, of course. Fights broke out. Customers turned cruel. Police raided without warning. But still the women returned, because within these noisy spaces lay warmth, light, and the chance to earn another day of life. Imagine stepping outside after hours in such a place. The streets are quiet again, the fog curling low, the air sharp with cold. Behind you, the music hall grows still, its laughter fading into memory. Ahead lies only the long walk back to a lodging house or a rented bed. Yet in that fleeting glow of rouge and laughter, for just a while the burden felt lighter. So let us leave the taverns now, their music echoing faintly behind us, and wander toward another presence in the streets, the steady, watchful eyes of policemen, whose lanterns swung like pendulums of law and suspicion. The taverns fade behind us, their laughter dissolving into mist, and now we step into quieter streets. Here, the rhythm changes. Footsteps slow, voices hush, and in the distance the steady glow of a lantern swings side to side, the unmistakable sign of a Victorian policeman making his rounds. For the women of the night, the constable was both a familiar shadow and a constant danger. Imagine walking through Whitechapel in 1882. The fog presses close, gas lamps throw weak halos of light, and a woman, shawl drawn tightly around her, waits at a street corner. She's weary but alert, scanning the street for a customer. And then, boots against cobbles, the flicker of a lantern. She stiffens. The policeman approaches. To us, the figure might feel like safety, but to her it was far more complicated. A policeman could offer protection from a violent client, yes, but he could also arrest her for loitering, fine her for soliciting, or worse, demand favours in exchange for looking the other way. The law was not a shield for these women. It was a weight they carried on every corner. Imagine the sound, the slow, steady scrape of boots as the constable passes, the faint rattle of his truncheon at his belt, the hiss of his breath in the cold night. Women knew the rhythms of their beats, timing their movements to avoid unnecessary trouble. A glance exchanged could mean warning, or it could mean a summons. And yet there was also familiarity. The same officers walked the same rounds each night, and over time women learned their moods, their habits. Some constables were stern, issuing warnings with clipped words. Others were indifferent, ignoring what happened so long as order was kept. A few, sadly, used their power cruelly, pressing advantage where they knew women had none. Picture two women standing beneath a gas lamp, their shawls brushing as they whisper. "He's on Bishopsgate tonight," one murmurs, nodding toward a side street. "Best move on before he reaches here." They slip away, vanishing into fog, leaving behind only the faint echo of laughter. It was a delicate dance, choreographed night after night between women and the watchmen of the city. Court records of the era are filled with their encounters. A woman fined for disorderly conduct because she had raised her voice in protest. Another arrested for public nuisance, her only crime being visible at the wrong hour. The law did not care for hunger or survival, it only cared for order, and these women lived perpetually on the wrong side of it. Yet even in this tension, there was a strange kind of reliance. A constable's presence could scare off dangerous men, and women sometimes lingered deliberately in sight of one, hoping his shadow would keep worse fates at bay. In a world where safety was scarce, even the double-edged presence of the law could feel like a fragile shield. Imagine standing there yourself. The night air damp, the fog thick, the flicker of lantern light growing nearer. Your heart tightens. Will it be a warning? A fine? A weary glance passed without a word? Every encounter is uncertain, and yet every night the dance repeats. And as the policeman's boots fade once more into distance, the women return to their posts, shawls tight, faces painted, hearts steadying again. Life goes on, in rhythm with lanterns swinging through the fog. So let us drift now from the beat of the constable's rounds to another layer of their world, the reformers and rescue societies, those who sought to change these women's lives, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with condescension. The lanterns of policemen fade into mist, their rhythms steady as clockwork, and now another figure emerges from the fog. Not the officer of the law, but the reformer, the missionary, the well-meaning rescuer who believed he carried salvation in his pocket. Victorian England was full of rescue societies, charitable groups formed to save prostitutes from their lives of sin. Their intentions varied. Some came from genuine compassion, others from moral superiority, and still others from the desire to control. But to the women themselves, these reformers were another presence to navigate, another voice added to the chorus of judgment and survival. Imagine a narrow mission hall tucked between warehouses in 1874. A small fire burns in the grate, its smoke curling against walls lined with pamphlets. At the front, a clergyman in black reads solemnly from the Bible, his voice steady but heavy with disapproval. Rows of wooden benches creak under the weight of women, some listening, some only there for the hot cup of tea offered at the end. For many, that tea was reason enough. Rescue societies lured women in with warmth, food, and sometimes shelter. A bowl of soup or a piece of bread might mean the difference between enduring another night on the streets or fainting from hunger. Reformers promised new lives, jobs in laundries, training as servants. To a few, these offers led to change. To many more, they were fleeting, unsustainable, or out of reach. Picture a woman sitting near the back of such a hall. Her shawl is thin, her face still touched with powder from the night before. She listens to the sermon with half an ear, her mind on the child she left sleeping at the lodging house. She's grateful for the bread, but weary of the scolding. The words fallen and redemption fall heavily on her shoulders. She takes the tea, nods politely, and slips back into the fog. For her, survival cannot wait for salvation. Rescue societies often misunderstood the realities of women's lives. They assumed prostitution was always chosen willingly, never recognizing hunger, joblessness, or abandonment as driving forces. They spoke of morality while women thought of rent. They offered sewing lessons to those who already knew the needle but could not live on a seamstress's wage. Their solutions rarely matched the problems. And yet within these halls there were glimmers of kindness. Some reformers did truly listen. A missionary might provide shelter to a mother and her child, asking nothing in return. A matron at a rescue home might offer gentleness instead of scorn, teaching not with lectures but with patience. These rare figures left lasting impressions, remembered in the whispered gratitude of women who had known little kindness. Still, most felt alienated by the relentless language of sin. Imagine hearing night after night that you were fallen, broken, in need of rescue. It wore down the spirit as much as cold and hunger wore down the body. Many women learned to play the part, nodding at sermons, repeating words of repentance, all to secure another bowl of soup before vanishing back into the fog. And then there were the pamphlets, thousands of them, fluttering through the streets. The Wages of Sin, The Scarlet Woman, Rescue for the Fallen. They painted lurid pictures of damnation full of fire and thunder, as though terror could erase poverty. Some women laughed at them, using the paper to wrap food or line shoes. Others tucked them into shawls, not out of belief, but because paper was paper, useful in its own way. The reformers meant to save, but they also judged, and so their presence was both shelter and burden. For every hot drink offered, there was a reminder that society saw these women not as survivors, but as sinners. Picture again the woman leaving the mission hall, shawl wrapped tightly against the night air. Behind her, hymns echo faintly, fading into the distance. Ahead of her, the streets wait, as indifferent as ever. She walks on, her shoes thin, her painted face pale in the gaslight, carrying bread for her child and the weary knowledge that her life cannot be mended by sermons. And so, from the echo of the reformers' voices, we step next into another world, the medical gaze, the examinations, and the fear of disease that haunted every woman who walked these streets. The mission hall fades behind us, its hymns dissolving into the fog, and now another kind of shadow stretches over the lives of Victorian prostitutes, the cold, clinical hand of medicine. The 19th century was a time of growing scientific curiosity, but also of deep fear, fear of disease, fear of contagion, fear of the unseen dangers lurking in bodies and air. For prostitutes, this fear often turned into scrutiny. They were viewed as both victims and threats, pitied and condemned, examined and exposed. Imagine a government hospital ward in 1866. The walls are stark, the air sharp with carbolic acid, the smell of disinfectant mingling with sickness. Rows of iron beds line the room, each covered in rough white sheets. Women lie there, coughing, shivering, some too weak to move. A doctor in black coat and stiff collar moves down the line, notebook in hand, his expression detached. To him, these women are not individuals with names and stories. They are cases, entries in a ledger of disease. The Contagious Diseases Acts, passed in the 1860s, gave police the power to arrest women suspected of prostitution and subject them to medical examinations. These examinations were invasive, humiliating, often performed without consent. Imagine the dread of being taken from the street, not to a prison cell but to a ward where the body itself was treated as evidence. For many women, this was as frightening as the streets themselves. The examination table was cold, the instruments harsh, the language clinical and unfeeling. Some women resisted, others endured in silence, but all carried the weight of shame. To be examined was to be marked, labelled not only as diseased but as fallen, unworthy of dignity. And yet, paradoxically, the same society that feared disease also depended on these women. Soldiers, sailors, clerks, all found their way to the streets, and the burden of disease was placed squarely on the shoulders of the women, never on the men who visited them. Reformers spoke of purity, doctors of containment, but the women themselves bore the consequences. Picture a woman leaving such a hospital, her shawl pulled tightly around her, her steps slow, her face pale not from powder but from weariness. She has endured the cold steel of instruments, the judgment in the doctor's eyes, the whispers of nurses. She walks back into the fog, her body sore, her spirit heavier, knowing she's seen not as a mother, not as a daughter, not as a woman, but as a vessel of disease. The fear of illness shaped daily life in quieter ways too. Women whispered warnings to one another about sick customers, about the risks of unclean lodgings, about fevers that seemed to spread in damp rooms. They knew more than society gave them credit for. They recognized patterns, who grew ill after nights in certain places, who coughed blood after too many winters on the street. They shared this knowledge softly, in doorways and alleys, protecting one another where official medicine often failed. Yet still the shadow of disease lingered. Newspapers filled with stories of contagion, sermons thundered against sinful living, and pamphlets painted lurid pictures of women as carriers of death. To walk the streets was not only to face hunger or violence, but to live under the constant gaze of suspicion, your very body treated as a threat. And in the quiet of the night, when laughter from taverns died down and footsteps faded, women lay awake in shared beds, listening to the coughs of strangers in the dark. Each cough was a reminder that the line between survival and sickness was thin, fragile as a thread in worn fabric. Still, they carried on. Painted faces, patched shawls, laughter in taverns, all were acts of defiance against the fear that pressed in on them. For even in the shadow of disease, life demanded to be lived and dignity demanded to be claimed. So let us step softly away from the hospital ward and its harsh lights and return to the streets themselves, where whispers, gossip, and rumour wove another kind of survival, another way of navigating a city that both ignored and consumed them. The hospital's cold walls fade behind us, their white sheets and clinical stairs dissolving into memory, and now we return to the narrow veins of the city, the alleyways where whispers lived. Imagine London at midnight, the fog sitting low, the lamplight weak. The wide streets are quieter now, but the alleys pulse with life, hidden in their shadows. Here, prostitutes gathered in twos and threes, their shawls drawn close, their voices low. Conversations were not luxuries, they were survival. Words passed between them like coins, exchanged in secrecy, carrying warnings, comfort, or plans for the night ahead. Picture two women leaning against a brick wall, its surface damp with evening mist. Their dresses brush the cobbles as they huddle close. One lights a small clay pipe, the ember glowing faintly against the fog, and between puffs she speaks. "Watch yourself near Bishopsgate. There's a rough one about tonight." The other nods, her painted face serious, and in that moment danger is lessened, if only slightly, by the sharing of knowledge. These conversations wove an invisible net of protection. Don't trust the sailor in the red scarf. The constable on Limehouse Lane is in a foul mood tonight. The matron at the lodging house has raised the rent. Each whisper carried weight, a thread added to the fragile web that kept them alive. And it was not only warnings, there was laughter too. Teasing remarks about customers, jokes about reformers with their endless pamphlets, gossip about a woman who'd found a generous patron or a friend who had vanished to the country with a man of means. Humour was their lantern in the fog, softening the darkness with its glow. Imagine the sounds of such an alleyway. The distant clatter of a cart passing on the main road, the drip of water from a broken gutter, the soft rustle of skirts as women shift their weight against the cold. Their voices rise and fall like a secret song, words layered with both sorrow and wit. A passerby might hear only fragments, but for those within, these were the conversations that carried them through the night. There were deeper talks too, whispered in moments of rare stillness. A memory of a lost child, a confession of hunger, a dream of leaving London for someplace quieter. Some women spoke of homes they could never return to, families who had turned them away. Others spoke of hopes that flickered like the gas lamps above them, fragile, trembling, yet not extinguished. Friendships grew in these shadows. Women who shared beds in lodging houses now shared secrets in alleys. They lent one another shawls, split the last piece of bread, and promised to look out for each other. In a world that branded them fallen, they built their own kind of family, bound not by blood but by survival. And sometimes silence spoke louder than words. Two women standing side by side, neither speaking, simply sharing warmth as they waited. In that silence there was solidarity, the knowledge that neither faced the night alone. Imagine leaving such an alley. The whispers fade behind you, the women disappear into the fog, their voices carried off like smoke. To the rest of the city they are invisible, forgotten, but in those brief moments, in those damp corners, they carved out a space of their own, a space filled with voices that mattered. And so, from the soft murmur of alleyway conversations, we move next into another layer of their world, the role of gossip and rumour, the invisible currents of talk that shaped reputations, opportunities, and dangers alike. The alleyway whispers drift into silence, their fragments carried away like smoke in the fog, and now we step into another unseen force that shaped the lives of Victorian prostitutes, gossip and rumour. Words, after all, were not only spoken in shadows, They rippled through streets, taverns, lodging houses, and even the grand parlours of the respectable. In a world where newspapers thrived on scandal and neighbours thrived on talk, a woman's reputation could shift overnight, carried on the wings of rumour. For prostitutes, whose lives already balanced on a fragile edge, gossip was both weapon and shield. It could bring customers or drive them away. It could invite pity or summon the constable's eye. Imagine a lodging house in 1871. A group of women sit around a dim fire, their shawls wrapped tightly, their voices hushed but eager. One tells of a friend who vanished suddenly. She's gone off with a gentleman to the country, so they say. Another shakes her head. Or to prison, if truth be told. The fire crackles, shadows dance on the walls, and the truth is swallowed by speculation. Yet even without proof, the story lives on, repeated the next night in another street, another tavern. Gossip spread quickly because it was survival. A whispered warning, don't take the tall one with the scar, he won't pay, could travel from Whitechapel to Lambeth within days. Stories of kindness travelled too, though less often. A man who gave extra coins, a matron who turned a blind eye when rent was short, a neighbour who shared bread without asking. These stories mattered. They shaped choices, paths, and trust. And then there were the darker rumours, those painted by society itself. Pamphlets and penny papers told lurid tales of fallen women luring honest men to ruin, of disease spreading through careless contact, of moral decay hiding in music halls. Respectable families whispered of neighbourhoods to avoid, streets where that sort of woman gathered. Gossip was not only exchanged among the women themselves, it was also the weapon used against them, justifying laws, raids, and sermons. Picture a woman walking through such a world of talk. Her name may be unknown to many, yet her presence is a story in itself. Neighbours point, whisper, laugh behind gloved hands. Children giggle and repeat cruel nicknames overheard from adults. She becomes less a person, more a tale to be passed along, her humanity dissolved into rumour. And yet, gossip within their own circle could carry tenderness. Women told stories to make each other laugh, embellishing the absurdities of the night. He tripped on his own boots, one might say, sending the group into quiet giggles. They teased one another about their rouge, their patched shawls, their eccentric customers. Humour softened the sting of harsher rumours, reminding them that they still held control over their own stories, at least among friends. There was strategy too. A clever woman might start a rumour herself, crafting an image to draw customers or to scare off rivals. Others kept silent, letting whispers swirl around them, knowing that sometimes mystery was safer than explanation. Imagine standing in the corner of a tavern, listening not to the music but to the background murmur, the steady hum of conversation where stories are traded like coins. In that hum lives both danger and protection, cruelty and care. Words, after all, were as real a currency as shillings, and as gossip spreads, fading into the night, we step into another comparison. The difference between life in brothels and life on the streets. Two worlds divided by walls, yet both bound by the same struggle to survive. The rumours fade into the fog, their echoes lingering in the air, and now we step through two very different doors. One leading into the open streets, the other into the shuttered rooms of the brothel. Both belonged to the lives of Victorian prostitutes, and though they overlapped in struggle, the textures of each were distinct. Imagine the street first. A woman stands beneath a gas lamp, her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders, her shoes thin against the cold stones. She shifts from foot to foot, not only to keep warm but to signal to those who pass. The street is her stage, her market, her place of risk. Here, everything is uncertain. A kind customer may appear, or a cruel one. A policeman may pass silently, or stop to question. Hunger may drive her to walk for hours, only to return to her lodging with nothing. Survival here is moment by moment, coin by coin, breath by breath. The street demanded endurance. Rain soaked through skirts, fog obscured vision, cold numbed fingers and feet. Women walked long stretches, hoping to be noticed, yet never too much to draw unwanted attention. They carried with them the noise of taverns, the smell of smoke, the watchful eyes of strangers. Every night was unpredictable. every corner a gamble. Now, step instead into a brothel. The shutters are drawn, muffling the outside world. Inside, gas lamps burn steadily, casting a golden glow on patterned wallpaper, on carpets worn but still softer than cobblestones. The air smells of candle wax, perfume, and the faint sourness of wine spilled into velvet. The brothel is not freedom, it is confinement, but it offers for some a steadier existence. Here, a madam governs. She collects earnings, assigns rooms, enforces rules. The women who work within these walls trade one uncertainty for another. Less exposure to the elements, but greater dependence on the house. Some find protection here. Rooms to sleep in, regular customers, food provided in exchange for their earnings. Others find it stifling, trapped under the control of the madam, unable to leave without debt or punishment. Picture a brothel's parlour in 1878. A group of women sit around a low table, their dresses brighter than those worn on the streets, chosen to impress rather than endure weather. One plucks a tune on a piano, another laughs at a customer's story, while others wait silently, eyes watchful. Outside, the fog curls and the city bustles. Inside, the world feels contained, thick with both comfort and unease. The contrast is sharp. On the streets, a woman risks violence from strangers but keeps what little she earns. In the brothel, she risks losing her independence, her coins swallowed by the madam's cut, but gains, at least for the moment, a roof and walls. And yet, in both lives, there is vulnerability. In both, the women were judged, condemned by society, treated as outsiders. The streets exposed them to hunger and cold. The brothels tied them to debts and rules. Neither offered true freedom, only different shades of survival. But there were choices made, however narrow. Some women moved between the two worlds, working in brothels when they needed shelter, returning to the streets when debts grew too heavy. Others preferred the freedom of cobblestones, however bitter, over the velvet cages of parlours. Each path was carved by circumstance, by need, by the shifting balance between risk and refuge. Imagine leaving such a brothel now, stepping back into the cool night air. The noise of the parlour fades behind you, replaced once more by the sounds of horses and distant bells. The streets and the houses stand side by side, both shadows of the same story. And as we walk away, we drift toward another layer of superstition. The idea of bad luck customers. The belief that some encounters carried not only danger but curses that lingered long after the night was done. The brothel door closes behind us, its velvet shadows left in silence, and once more we are back in the fog-damp streets. Here, beneath the dim glow of gas lamps, stories of luck and ill omen pass from one woman to another, as quietly as coins slipped into a palm. Victorian prostitutes lived not only by instinct but also by superstition. The streets were unpredictable, filled with danger and chance, and when survival depended so heavily on moments that could not be controlled, belief in omens became a way of making sense of chaos. One such belief was that of the bad luck customer, a man whose presence was said to bring harm, whether through violence, misfortune, or sickness. Imagine an alleyway in 1872, two women leaning close beneath a dripping gutter. One whispers urgently, "Don't take the tall one in the grey hat. He brings nothing but trouble." Her friend nods gravely, clutching her shawl tighter. The warning is vague, but in that world it is enough. Better to lose a coin than risk a curse. These whispers spread quickly. Some customers were known to cheat, offering coin then snatching it back. Others grew violent after drink, their cruelty remembered in bruises. Some carried sickness, their faces pale, their coughs rattling in the dark. Each encounter left its trace, and the women wove these traces into stories. Over time, the stories became superstition, men to avoid, signs to watch for, bad luck carried like a shadow. Picture a woman watching from beneath a lamp as a man approaches. His boots echo on the cobblestones, his hat pulled low, his hands restless at his sides. She studies him closely, remembering whispers from other nights. Does he walk too fast? Does his voice sound too sharp? A flicker of unease is enough to turn her away, slipping into the fog before he reaches her. She cannot afford to ignore her instincts or the stories shared by her companions. Superstitions also attach themselves to objects and gestures. Some believed that if a man dropped a coin before paying, it foretold a night of trouble. Others said that a customer who crossed himself before entering a room carried bad fortune. Even colours could carry meaning. A certain shade of scarf, a sprig of artificial flowers, said to mark men who would bring sorrow. Were these beliefs true? Perhaps not in any logical sense, yet they served a purpose. In a life where choices were few, superstition gave women the language of agency. To call someone bad luck was to warn, to resist, to reclaim some measure of control in a world that sought to strip it away. And sometimes, these warnings saved lives. A woman who turned away from a man whispered about in alleys might never know what danger she had avoided. The superstition itself became protection, woven into the fabric of survival. But bad luck was not always attached to customers. Some women spoke of entire streets as cursed, corners where violence seemed to gather like fog. Others believed in unlucky nights, Mondays most often, when wages were thin and tempers short. In these patterns, they found a way to read the unpredictable city, mapping danger with whispers and belief. Picture the quiet of a late-night lodging house. Women curled together on straw beds, sharing tales of the night. One murmurs about a man who refused to pay, another about a stranger whose cough left her uneasy. They nod solemnly, adding names and details to their shared ledger of memory. Tomorrow those stories will pass through alleys and taverns, shaping choices, shaping lives. Superstition was not weakness, it was resilience, a way to turn fear into story, story into warning, warning into survival. And so, with these whispers lingering in our ears, let us step forward into another trial of their world, the bitter winters, the thin shoes, the endless walking that turned cold itself into an enemy. The whispers of bad luck customers fade into the damp night air, and now we turn our steps into the bitterest season of all, the long, unrelenting winters of Victorian England. For prostitutes, as for the poor in every corner of the city, cold was not just discomfort. It was a constant gnawing adversary, one that threatened to undo survival itself. Imagine the streets of London in January 1873. The fog is no longer soft, but sharp, edged with frost. Each breath comes out in pale clouds, hanging heavy in the still air. The cobblestones are slick with ice, and horses' hooves strike sparks as they stumble against the frozen ground. The city is quieter than usual, as those with means remain indoors, gathered around coal fires. But for the women of the streets, the night is unavoidable. Cold or not, hunger presses. Rent does not wait for spring. Their shoes were thin, soles worn down by miles of walking, leather cracked, stitching undone, many padded with rags or newspaper to keep out the damp. Yet still the icy water seeped in, numbing toes until they turned blue. Imagine standing for hours in such shoes, the cold creeping up through ankles, into knees, into bones themselves. To endure the night was to fight a quiet war against frost. Clothing was no greater shield. Dresses were patched and repatched, shawls thin and frayed, cloaks too costly to be afforded by many. Some women wrapped extra skirts beneath their outer layer, not for modesty but for warmth. Others pressed close together in doorways, sharing body heat as much as conversation. Still, the cold found its way in, curling through fabric like a thief. Walking became both necessity and strategy. To stand still meant to freeze. To move meant at least some measure of warmth. And so, women walked, up and down Whitechapel Road, along Bishopsgate, through the twisting alleys of Lambeth, step after step, night after night, their feet carrying them not toward home but toward survival. The streets were endless, and so was the walking. Picture two women pacing side by side beneath a flickering gas lamp. Their shoes slap against the cobbles, skirts brushing damp stones. One mutters through chattering teeth, "Keep moving, love, else you'll freeze." The other nods, pulling her shawl tighter. They walk in circles, not because the path matters, but because movement itself keeps them alive. And yet, even in winter, there were moments of reprieve. A tavern door opened, spilling warmth into the street, and a woman might slip inside for a few precious minutes. A hot potato sold from a cart warmed cold fingers, if only briefly. A kind customer might buy tea, the steam rising like a fragile promise against the frost. These small mercies carried women through nights that otherwise seemed endless. Illness, of course, followed cold. Chilblains, coughs, fevers, frostbite, all haunted the poor in winter. A wet hem against thin stockings could become pneumonia within days. The lodging houses were no better, their straw mattresses damp, their air heavy with the coughs of the sick. But to stop walking was to invite sickness faster. And so they walked on. Imagine lying down at last, shoes removed, stockings damp, feet swollen from hours of pacing. The straw pricks through thin skirts, the air in the room no warmer than the street outside. Sleep comes slowly, shallow and restless, interrupted by coughing neighbours. And in dreams, perhaps, warmth returns. Sunlight, blankets, fires. But morning brings only frost again. Winter was relentless, yet the women endured it with the same resilience they carried through every trial. They laughed even in the cold, joked about numb toes, huddled together and told stories to distract from the chill. Survival was not only about the body, it was about spirit, about refusing to be undone by the season that pressed hardest against them. So let us carry their footsteps with us, echoing through frozen streets as we move next into another corner of survival, the hidden economies of pawn shops and pledges, where garments and belongings were traded again and again to keep life going, coin by fragile coin. The frostbitten streets grow quiet behind us, footsteps fading into the mist, and now we step into another space of survival. Not the tavern, not the lodging house, but the pawn shop, where the silent exchange of objects for coins kept countless women alive. Imagine a narrow shop in 1875. Its windows are crowded with clocks that no longer chime, candlesticks that have lost their polish, rows of watches hanging from hooks, dresses folded behind glass. The smell inside is of dust, old fabric, and the faint tang of metal polished too many times. Behind the counter sits the pawnbroker, spectacles perched low, his ledger open like a judge's book. Every day women came through the door, clutching bundles wrapped in shawls, pledges of survival. For prostitutes, the pawn shop was both lifeline and trap. Here, a shawl could become rent, a dress could become supper, a pair of boots could buy a night's lodging. Almost anything could be exchanged. A ring inherited from a mother, a child's toy, even bedclothes pulled from a lodging house cot. The pawnbroker rarely asked questions. He wrote figures into his ledger, gave out coins and added the item to his shelves, where it would wait for redemption or resale. Picture a woman stepping forward, her cheeks pale in the cold. From her bundle she produces a dress, carefully folded, its hem already patched and frayed. She lays it on the counter, her eyes fixed not on the garment but on the coins she hopes will follow. The pawnbroker examines it, fingers brushing the fabric, and offers a sum, small, always small. She accepts. The dress disappears behind him, and the coins clink into her hand. With that sound she has bought another day. Yet pawnshops were not only about loss, they were also about cycles. The same shawl might be pawned and redeemed half a dozen times in a single winter. A woman earned just enough to retrieve it, wore it for a night, and then, when hunger returned, pledged it again. Objects became restless travellers, moving back and forth across counters, gathering stories as they went. The pawn ticket itself became a fragile treasure. A small slip of paper smudged with ink, it was proof of hope, the promise that the item might one day return. Women tucked these slips carefully into shawls or bodices, guarding them as though they were coins themselves. Lose the ticket, and the garment was gone forever. Keep it safe, and there was still a chance. The economy of pawnshops was not only about goods, it was also about trust. Women warned one another which brokers were cruel, which were fairer, which pressed advantage too far. Some pawnbrokers took pity, offering a few extra pennies, or holding an item longer before reselling. Others showed no mercy, their ledgers more important than the lives before them. In every transaction there was imbalance, yet also a rhythm. The exchange of need for coin, coin for time, time for survival. Imagine the shelves themselves stacked high with forgotten objects. Each shawl once wrapped a woman against the cold, each ring once sat on a finger, perhaps a token of love. Each pair of boots once carried someone down endless streets. In the silence of the shop, these objects whisper their stories, waiting, perhaps, for a return. For prostitutes, pawn shops were woven into daily life as tightly as taverns or lodging houses. They allowed flexibility, a fragile thread of choice in a world with so few options. To pawn an item was to admit struggle, but also to assert determination to say, I will keep going, I will return. And sometimes there was joy. The moment a woman redeemed her dress, pulled it close once more, fastened her shawl again, it was a reunion, however small. For a night at least, she felt whole. So let us leave the pawn shop now, its counters cluttered with pledges, its ledgers heavy with names, and step back into the streets. Ahead lies not the cold shadow of trade, but the softer glow of companionship, the secret friendships and found families these women built with one another, ties stronger than coins or contracts. The pawnshop door shuts softly behind us, its shelves crowded with silent pledges, and now we walk once more into the fog-thick streets. But this time, our gaze turns not to money or survival, but to something gentler, more hidden. The bonds that women formed with each other, the friendships that stitched their fractured lives into fragile but enduring tapestries. Victorian society painted prostitutes as solitary figures, lonely women wandering the streets, outcasts beyond the reach of kin or community. But in truth, many built deep ties with one another. They became sisters in hardship, protectors in danger, and in the absence of family, they created families of their own. Imagine a lodging house in 1877, the fire low, shadows flickering on soot-darkened walls. Two women share a bed, back to back, beneath a thin blanket. They are not related, not bound by blood, but by trust. One murmurs softly, "I'll wake you if the constable comes sniffing about." The other nods in half-sleep, comforted by the promise. This is not romance nor obligation, it is survival through loyalty, companionship against the cold emptiness of the night. Friendships bloomed in small gestures, a woman lending her shawl for an evening, another sharing rouge, dabbing a touch on her friend's cheeks before they stepped into the fog. A loaf of bread split 3 ways, a pawn ticket kept safe in a bodice while its owner went out to earn the money to redeem it. These small acts formed an invisible web, binding them together more firmly than society ever imagined. Picture a quiet corner of a tavern. 3 women sit close, their laughter soft, their voices mingling with the hum of the crowd. They tease one another about customers, trade jokes about reformers, and share dreams of places far from London, seaside cottages, green fields, a small shop of their own. They know these dreams may never come true, but to speak them aloud is to claim a little hope. And in that hope, they find strength. There were protective bonds too. Women warned one another of dangerous men, pulling friends out of harm's way, shouting in alleys when one of their own was threatened. A group could scatter quickly when the police arrived, but often they reassembled later, checking to be sure no one was lost. In a world where the law rarely protected them, they became each other's guardians. And sometimes, found families grew larger still. A child left behind in a lodging house might be cared for by a group of women, each taking turns to feed or comfort, none officially a mother but all acting as one. A sick woman might find her companions pooling coins for her medicine. A newcomer might be taken under an elder's wing, taught where to stand, which taverns to avoid, how to survive the streets. Imagine the warmth of such bonds on a freezing night. 2 women huddled together, sharing stories to distract from the cold. A group singing softly, off-key but united, their voices rising like a fragile shield against loneliness. In their company, the harshness of the world softened, if only for a while. These friendships did not erase hardship, but they gave it shape, made it bearable. They offered laughter in sorrow, comfort in sickness, solidarity in fear. They were the families society denied them, created not by blood or law, but by choice and necessity. And even when women vanished, taken by illness, by prison, or by sudden escape to another life, their memory lingered. Friends spoke their names in alleys, kept their pawn tickets, remembered their laughter. In this way they lived on, carried not in history books but in whispered stories shared among those who loved them. So let us leave these women now, their arms linked as they walk through the fog, laughter mingling with the sound of boots on cobblestones. Ahead lies another chapter of their lives, encounters with the men who came and went, gentlemen, clerks and sailors, each carrying his own story into the fleeting exchanges of the night. The sound of laughter between friends lingers faintly behind us, soft as fog against brick walls. And now we turn our gaze to those who stepped briefly into these women's lives, the customers, varied as the city itself. Gentlemen in polished boots, weary clerks with ink-stained fingers, sailors with sea salt still clinging to their coats. Each encounter was fleeting, yet each carried the weight of survival, danger, or, sometimes, a surprising kindness. Imagine first the gentleman, a man in a tall hat, his coat fine wool, his cane tapping lightly on the stones. By day he may be a respected figure, a barrister perhaps, or a merchant with a reputation to maintain. But by night, in the dim fog of Whitechapel, he sought what society denied him in daylight. For the women, a gentleman was a paradox. His coins were heavier, his manners smoother, but his disdain often sharper. He might treat her as entertainment, a curiosity, a secret to be forgotten by morning, and yet his presence could mean rent for a week, food for a child, warmth for a cold room. Now picture the clerk. His clothes are neat but plain, his wages modest. By day he bent over ledgers in an office, the smell of ink staining his cuffs. By night he came to the street seeking escape from monotony, from loneliness. He had fewer coins to spare, but sometimes more patience, more conversation. Women spoke of clerks who lingered to talk, who asked questions about their lives, who seemed to crave not only touch but companionship. For some, these were the least dangerous encounters, humble exchanges between two people equally pressed by the city's weight. And then the sailor, his boots heavy with miles, his coat smelling of tar and salt. He carried stories of ports far away, of storms survived, of coins earned in bursts and spent in nights. Sailors were unpredictable, sometimes generous, spending freely as if money meant nothing after the risks of the sea, sometimes rough, quick to anger, their voices booming like waves against stone. Women learned to read them quickly, gauging whether the night would end in laughter or bruises. Picture a music hall in 1879. A sailor sings along loudly with the chorus, his laughter filling the room. At the next table, a clerk sips quietly at his gin, glancing shyly at a woman across the way. Near the bar, a gentleman whispers to the barkeep, his eyes darting to be sure he is not recognized. And among them, the women move gracefully, painted faces calm, their shawls drawn tight, navigating each encounter like sailors themselves navigating treacherous waters. These men were not only individuals, they were reflections of the city. Each class, each trade, each accent mingled in the streets of London. For the women, they were customers, yes, but also markers of survival. A gentleman might mean enough coin to redeem a pawned shawl. A clerk might mean a quiet night, free of violence. A sailor might mean risk, but also laughter, a brief glimpse of another world. And yet, in every encounter there was distance. The men returned to their lives, offices, ships, drawing rooms, while the women remained. Their names were forgotten, their faces blurred in memory, but the coins they left behind kept life moving. Imagine a woman at dawn, sitting in a lodging house counting the few coins in her palm. Each one carries a story. The sharp words of a gentleman, the nervous smile of a clerk, the booming laughter of a sailor. They're gone, but their presence lingers in the shape of her day, bread to buy, rent to pay, a child to feed. These encounters were fleeting, transactional, yet within them lived the textures of Victorian nights, the crossing of worlds, the mingling of classes, the fragile balance between survival and danger. And now, as the first light of morning creeps pale across the city, let us follow these women not to customers, but to the simplest and most vital of comforts: food. A bowl of soup, a crust of bread, a hot cup of tea. small meals that carried them through endless nights. The echoes of sailors' laughter and Clark's quiet footsteps drift away into the fog. And now we step into a gentler, humbler world. The simple comfort of food, the taverns where meals were bought, shared, and savoured in snatched moments of peace. For women who lived night to night, food was more than nourishment. It was warmth, safety, even dignity. Imagine a tavern in 1876, its windows glowing faintly against the dark. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and the smell of ale, but also the comforting aroma of stew simmering in a pot. Wooden tables are crowded, benches creaking under the weight of men and women alike. In one corner, a woman leans over a bowl of broth, her hands cupped around it as though it were treasure. She drinks slowly, letting the heat seep into her body, her face softening as the chill of the streets fades for a moment. Food in these taverns was plain but precious. Thick bread, cheese hard at the edges, bowls of potatoes, meat pies when luck allowed. A pint of beer or a mug of gin warmed the body, even if it dulled the senses. For many prostitutes, these meals were the only solid nourishment of the day. Sometimes, kindness appeared in the form of a customer buying supper. Other times, it was shared among friends. Two women splitting one pie, laughing as they divided the crust unevenly, one pretending to bargain for the larger half. Street food was another lifeline. Picture a vendor's cart on Whitechapel Road, the smell of roasted chestnuts curling through the cold air. Women crowded close, coins exchanged quickly, hands outstretched to catch the warmth. Hot potatoes wrapped in scraps of paper became both meal and hand warmer. A penny bun might last an afternoon, carried in a pocket and eaten slowly between customers. Even the smallest bite was a comfort, a reminder that hunger could be soothed if only briefly. Lodging houses offered their own meals, though often meagre. Thin porridge, bread spread with dripping, weak tea poured into chipped cups. Yet in those dining rooms, noisy with chatter and coughs, there was still a kind of fellowship. Women sat shoulder to shoulder, comparing the night's fortunes, joking about who had managed the best supper. Even the poorest meal felt lighter when shared with laughter. And food carried memory too. A crust of bread could bring back thoughts of childhood kitchens, of mothers baking, of harvests long gone. Some women spoke of dishes they missed, roasts, puddings, fruits they had not tasted in years. Others dreamed aloud of opening small shops or bakeries, imagining futures filled with more than tavern fare and street pies. These dreams, fragile as they were, flavoured the simplest meals with longing. Picture now a winter's night, a woman clutching a steaming mug of tea bought with her last coin. The liquid is weak, more water than leaves, but the heat fills her chest, softens the stiffness in her fingers. Around her, the city hums with noise, horses passing, distant bells ringing, but for a moment she is still, anchored by warmth. In that moment, the tea is not just drink, but solace. Food was survival, yes, but also ritual. A loaf split among friends, a drink shared after a long night, a stolen bite of pie in a quiet corner. These small acts reminded women that they were more than the label society gave them. They were human, deserving of comfort, of taste, of the joy that even simple food could bring. And so, as the stew simmers low in the tavern pot and the last chestnuts crackle in the vendor's pan, we step into the next layer of their world. The music halls and theatres, where entertainment flickered like gaslight, drawing women and customers alike into brief escapes from the heavy weight of reality. The warmth of tavern stews and street vendors' chestnuts fades behind us, and now the sound of another world begins to drift across the fog. A piano clinks through the night air, out of tune but full of spirit. Laughter bursts from a doorway, mingling with the smell of spilled ale and cheap perfume. This is the music hall, the heart of Victorian entertainment, the place where sorrow and hunger could be set aside, if only for an hour or two. Imagine stepping inside a music hall in 1878. The room glows with gaslight, the air thick with smoke, chatter, and the faint sweetness of tobacco. Wooden tables crowd the floor, sticky with spilled drink, while on stage a singer belts out a comic ballad, her hands on her hips, her voice carrying above the noise. The crowd roars, some clapping, some jeering, but all alive in the shared escape. For prostitutes, the music hall was more than entertainment, it was opportunity. Customers came here to drink, to laugh, to forget their daily struggles. In that haze, deals were struck, glances exchanged, nights arranged. A woman could linger near the bar, her laughter joining the crowds, waiting for a man to notice her. The stage gave cover, a noisy backdrop that softened the transaction. But it was not only business. For many, these halls were the only places where joy felt accessible. To laugh with the crowd, to hum along with a familiar tune, to clap at the end of a daring act, it reminded them that they were part of something larger than themselves. The music hall was messy, loud, chaotic, yet within it lived a kind of belonging. The theatres, more refined, carried a different allure. Picture the Strand, its theatres glowing with marquee lamps. Inside, velvet seats and chandeliers gave the illusion of grandeur. Here too, prostitutes moved among the crowd, though more discreetly. The gentlemen who came to watch Shakespeare or melodramas sometimes sought company after the curtain fell, and the women knew how to be present without drawing too much notice. Theatres were riskier perhaps, but also carried the promise of wealthier patrons. Entertainment itself mirrored their lives. Many comic songs in music halls poked fun at poverty, at landlords, at the absurdity of everyday survival. The women in the audience laughed hardest at these, recognizing themselves in the humor, finding relief in seeing their struggles turned into jest. A verse about thin shoes on icy nights might bring roars of laughter, even as the women's own feet still ached from walking such nights. Imagine two friends at a corner table, their shawls drawn tight but their faces glowing with laughter. One whispers between songs, "For a moment I almost forget the cold." The other nods, raising her mug in mock cheer. Around them, the hall vibrates with song, stamping boots, clinking glasses. In that moment, the world feels brighter, lighter, full of music rather than hunger. Yet not every story here was happy. Some women were thrown out by managers wary of police raids. Others faced danger in drunken crowds. But still they returned, drawn by the lights, the noise, the chance to feel alive. Music halls and theatres were escapes, but they were also mirrors of the city. Chaotic, vibrant, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind. Within their walls, laughter mixed with survival, song with sorrow, and for a few hours life felt more bearable. And as the curtain falls, the piano fades, and the gas lamps dim, we leave these halls behind. Outside waits the darker face of the city, the watchful eye of the law, the ever-present threat of constables and courts, turning the women's nights into trials not just of survival, but of justice twisted against them. The laughter of the music halls fades into the damp night air, and now the sound of boots takes its place, measured, steady, echoing across cobblestones. These are not the footsteps of customers, nor of friends, but of constables patrolling the streets with lanterns and suspicion. For the women of Victorian London, the law was less a shield than a shadow. Imagine Whitechapel in 1874. The fog clings thick to the air, gas lamps burn dimly, and constables walk their beats, truncheons at their sides. Their lanterns sweep over doorways and alleys, catching painted faces in sudden flashes of light. For prostitutes, the sight of those lanterns brought not safety but dread. To be noticed was to risk arrest, to be questioned, fined, or dragged before a magistrate. The Contagious Diseases Acts had already marked women as suspects of illness, and the Vagrancy Acts labelled them common prostitutes, reducing their lives to a legal category. A woman could be arrested simply for standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, her very presence treated as crime. Men who sought them walked freely. Women who survived by their company carried the burden of law. Picture a constable pausing beneath a lamp, his eyes fixed on a woman leaning against a wall. She pulls her shawl tighter, lowering her gaze, but still he approaches. His questions are sharp. "What are you doing here? Where are you going? Who are you with?" There are no safe answers. Silence may mean arrest. Defiance worse. Even cooperation offers no guarantee. For some constables, bribery softened the exchange. A coin slipped into a hand, a promise of information about a thief or a tavern brawl. These could buy leniency. For others, cruelty prevailed. Women spoke of being beaten, insulted, or marched through streets as examples, their dignity stripped as much as their freedom. Courts offered little refuge. Picture a magistrate's bench, the wood polished by decades of elbows and hands. A woman stands before it, shawl clutched tight, her voice barely above a whisper. The charges: loitering, disorderly conduct, solicitation. The magistrate sighs, barely looking at her. A fine is handed down, impossible to pay. The choice is grim, prison, or return to the streets to earn the fine before the day is done. Yet even within this harshness, stories varied. Some constables turned blind eyes, weary of endless arrests that changed nothing. Others offered small kindness, warning women before raids or allowing them to slip away into alleys. These moments, though rare, became part of the whispered maps of survival passed among friends. Avoid the tall one with the moustache, but the younger one near Bishopsgate. He'll let you be if you keep quiet. The law's gaze was heavy, but uneven. Gentlemen customers were rarely questioned. Respectable men vanished into fog without consequence. It was the women, already burdened with hunger and cold, who carried the double weight of judgment, first from society, then from the courts. Imagine leaving such a courtroom, the fine unpaid, the label of prostitute stamped upon your record. Outside, the streets are unchanged, the same fog, the same lamps, the same hunger. The law has not saved you, it has only reminded you of your place. Yet still you walk on because survival leaves no choice. The constable's boots fade now, their lanterns dim behind us, and ahead we hear a different sound. Pens scratching across paper, presses clattering, newspapers spilling into the streets with lurid tales. Gossip was not only whispered in alleys, it was shouted in headlines. And so we step into the world of media, where women's lives were turned into stories for the city to consume. The constable's lanterns fade into the mist, their footsteps swallowed by the fog, and now a new sound fills the night, the clatter of the printing press. Its rhythm is quick, mechanical, urgent. Sheets of paper spill out in stacks, damp with fresh ink, soon to be folded, hawked, and shouted through the streets by boys with sharp voices. Scandal! Vice! Fallen women of Whitechapel! For Victorian prostitutes, the newspaper was both mirror and monster. It reflected their existence, yes, but always distorted, always twisted into stories that entertained the respectable while shaming the desperate. Imagine a penny paper in 1872. Its front pages crowded with headlines, lurid fonts shouting about dens of iniquity and ruined maidens. Inside, the columns are filled with tales half true, half invented, designed to thrill middle-class readers sipping tea in safe parlours. A fight in a tavern becomes a riot. A single illness becomes an epidemic. A woman's death becomes a morality play, her life reduced to cautionary phrases, fallen, wretched, beyond redemption. The women themselves rarely read these words. Many could not read at all, and those who could had little access to papers. But the stories still reached them, whispered back through the voices of customers, reformers, and neighbours. They knew when their lives became entertainment. They felt the stares sharpen after a sensational headline. They carried the weight of reputations crafted not by their own words, but by ink and print. Public opinion was shaped in these pages. Respectable families reading over breakfast nodded solemnly at editorials warning of the dangerous classes. Politicians quoted lurid accounts as justification for laws. Clergymen thundered from pulpits, armed with anecdotes lifted directly from newspapers. A single sensational story could ripple through the city, tightening the net of judgment around women who had no chance to answer. And yet, within the same newspapers, contradictions flourished. Beside the condemnations, advertisements appeared for patent medicines, promising to cure private diseases. Reports of scandal sat side by side with reviews of music halls, encouraging respectable citizens to enjoy the very spaces they condemned. The hypocrisy was printed as plainly as the words themselves, though few acknowledged it. Picture a woman in a lodging house listening as a neighbour repeats the latest headline. They say another girl was found near Bishopsgate. Terrible business. The words hang in the air, heavy, half believed. The women exchange glances. Some scoff, others look uneasy. They know too well how truth is bent for paper sales, yet the rumours seep into their thoughts all the same. Some women even learn to use newspapers to their advantage. A dramatic death reported in print could raise curiosity in a neighbourhood, drawing more customers to those still living. A story of a notorious brothel might bring men eager to see its shadows for themselves. In this way, what was meant as condemnation sometimes became advertisement. Survival, after all, turned even scorn into coin. The press, like the law, marked prostitutes as spectacles. They were not individuals, but characters in stories, symbols of vice or cautionary examples of sin. Their real names, when printed, became scars, remembered long after the women themselves were gone. And yet, amidst all this noise, their true voices remained quiet, barely recorded, almost lost. Newspapers filled the silence with invention, and the public accepted invention as fact. Imagine the streets filled with paper scraps, ink smudged by rain, headlines half legible beneath boots. The city walks over their stories, never pausing, never questioning. The women step through those same scraps on their way to taverns, pawn shops, or alleys, living the lives that the papers only ever guessed at. So let us leave behind the press now, its clattering machines and shouted headlines, and step into the quieter spaces where women found fleeting peace, the hidden corners of dreams, imagination, and escapes woven not of paper, but of the heart. The newspapers crumble behind us, their inked voices fading like smoke in the damp night air. And now we turn towards something softer, something rarely recorded but always present, the dreams that lived inside the women themselves. For though their days were marked by hunger, cold, and judgment, their nights held more than survival. They held imagination, fleeting escapes into lives that might have been, or could still be. Imagine a lodging house in 1875, the fire gone out, the air heavy with the smell of damp straw and weary bodies. Women lie side by side, some coughing, some silent, but in whispers, a few speak of dreams. One tells of a cottage by the sea, whitewashed walls and gulls calling above. Another dreams of a bakery, warm bread rising in the oven, coins earned not in shadows but in daylight. A third, perhaps more daring, speaks of America, of ships that carried people to new lives far from London's fog. Their words are quiet, almost fragile, but they glow in the darkness like embers, each dream a flame against despair. Dreams came not only in words but in small acts of escape, a piece of ribbon tied into hair bright against a grey shawl, a song hummed softly while walking, a tune remembered from childhood, a moment stolen in a church pew, where silence felt holy and no one asked questions. These tiny gestures were not grand, but they mattered. They reminded women that their lives held more than the labels stamped upon them. Picture a woman walking along the Thames at dawn, the city still half asleep. The water glimmers faintly, catching the first pale light. She pauses, breathing the air, watching gulls wheel overhead. For a moment she imagines herself not as a prostitute, but as a traveller, a dreamer, a woman free to choose her path. The river becomes not only water, but symbol, a flowing reminder that life can carry one away, if only the chance comes. Some found escape in storytelling. In taverns, women exaggerated their nights, weaving humour into hardship, making each other laugh until their bellies ached. Others spoke of romances, real or invented, of men who treated them kindly, of fleeting moments that felt like love. These stories were not always true, but they were true enough to bring comfort. And then there were literal escapes. A woman disappearing suddenly from her usual corner, rumours spreading that she'd gone to the countryside with a farmer, or found work as a servant in a quieter town. Often the truth was harsher: illness, prison, death. But the stories told of escape lived on, nourishing hope in those who remained. If one woman could vanish into a better life, perhaps others could too. Dreams also lived in sleep itself, though even there they were uncertain. In the restless doze of overcrowded lodging houses, women dreamt of warmth, of full tables, of familiar faces long lost. But nightmares came too. Policemen's boots, cold cells, angry customers. Still, the dreams of gentler things returned again and again, as if refusing to be extinguished. Imagine now a woman holding her pawn ticket close, tucked safe in her bodice. She dreams of the day she can reclaim her shawl, of wearing it proudly rather than desperately. It is a small dream, yet in it lies dignity, agency, the quiet insistence that life can be more than survival. In a city that labelled them fallen, their dreams were rebellions. To imagine warmth, love, or freedom was to insist they deserved it, and in that insistence lay strength. So as we leave the dim straw beds, the whispered hopes, the small escapes woven into ribbons and songs, we walk toward the closing of this story, the ending that reflects not only their hardships, but their humanity, their dignity, and the way their memories linger, even when history tried to forget. The whispers of dreams fade into the dark, lingering like embers that refuse to die. And now we step softly into the closing chapter, the quiet legacy left by women whom history named fallen, but who lived lives rich in survival, resilience, and humanity. Victorian England rarely remembered them kindly. In newspapers they were scandal, in courts they were criminals, in sermons they were warnings. Their names were rarely recorded, their faces forgotten as quickly as the fog dissolved at dawn. And yet, in the silence between official words, their presence endures. In the bricks of lodging houses long demolished, in the cobblestones polished by endless footsteps, in the faded pages of pawnshop ledgers, their lives remain etched even if faintly. Imagine a quiet morning on Whitechapel Road. The city stirs awake. Carts rattling, children running, bakers pulling loaves from ovens. No one pauses to think of the women who walked here through the night, who braved constables' lanterns, who endured cold and hunger and scorn. Yet their footsteps are still here, invisible but real, woven into the very rhythm of the street. Their legacy is not grand, not carved in marble or preserved in gilded halls. It is quieter, humbler. It lives in the friendships they built, the children they raised, the laughter they shared in smoky taverns, the whispers of warning that kept one another safe. These small acts of care were their monuments, more lasting than the words of magistrates or the ink of scandal sheets. Picture a lodging house matron decades later, remembering the women who once filled her rooms. She recalls their painted faces, their shawls hung damp by the fire, their voices carrying songs into the night. She does not remember them as fallen. She remembers their laughter, their stubbornness, the way they endured when so much pressed against them. In her memory they are human, not cautionary tales. And perhaps that is the true legacy, not the judgments printed in newspapers, but the quiet insistence that they lived fully despite everything. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, friends. They carried tenderness alongside hardship, humour alongside sorrow. They were more than the narrow names given to them. Imagine now the silence of a modern museum, where a small exhibit speaks of Victorian London. Behind the glass, a pawn ticket rests, faded with age. A shawl, frayed at the edges, lies folded neatly. Visitors pass by, reading labels, moving on. But if one pauses, if one listens closely, perhaps they hear something more. The echo of women who once clutched those items in cold hands, who traded them for survival, who dreamed of redemption. Their lives may not have filled history books, but they fill the spaces between, the unspoken truths of a city that thrived on their invisibility. Their legacy is the reminder that survival itself is dignity, that even in the harshest worlds humanity flickers on. And now, as we leave their stories, let us walk once more into the quiet. The streets grow still, the lamps dim, the fog softens. Their footsteps fade, but not entirely. They linger, like a soft hum in the night, a reminder that forgotten lives are never truly gone. May their memories guide us into gentler dreams, where no one is judged by hunger, by survival, or by circumstance. As we close the final pages of this long, gentle journey through the forgotten lives of Victorian women, let your mind settle, let your breath slow. Their footsteps in the fog, their whispers in the dark, their laughter in taverns, and their quiet resilience. They drift now like mist, softening into memory. If you're still awake, notice how calm your body feels, how heavy your eyelids have grown, and if you have already drifted away, may these voices have carried you into a kinder dream. Thank you for sharing this time with me tonight. If these stories helped you rest, you can softly tap like or subscribe, only if it feels right. No pressure. Just a gentle way of saying that you'd like more calm journeys like this one. And now, dear friend, close your eyes fully, let the last flickers of gaslight fade, and allow yourself to be carried on into peaceful sleep. Sweet dreams until we meet again. Good night.